There are gardens where nothing grows clean, where even the most beautiful blooms are rooted in poison. And when the earth finally opens, it swallows the gardener whole. They say the Belmont Dynasty ended not in war, not in bankruptcy, but at a banquet, with a dessert so sweet it buried a bloodline. If you walk the windward slopes of Réunion today, you'll find the old estate overgrown, silent except for the wind through wild vanilla vines. 7 wooden crosses stand in a row, half hidden in jasmine and laurier rose. Locals won't go near it. They say the ground is cursed. The Baroness believed her garden grew only beauty. She forgot that someone else held the seeds. The morning they carried Baroness Héloïse de Belmont from her pavilion, the governor of Réunion stood frozen, his crystal glass still raised in a toast that would never finish. The woman who had charmed Port Louis society with her botanical salons lay twisted on the ground, her lips blue, her eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. The vanilla crème brûlée, her signature dish, the pride of her table, sat half-eaten on fine porcelain, steam still rising. But to understand how 7 gardeners destroyed a dynasty, you must first know what the Baroness planted in the dark. If stories of hidden justice pull you in, subscribe and watch what grows next. Réunion Island, 1824. The Domaine de Belmont clung to the island's eastern slopes, where mist rolled up from the coast each morning and settled in the valleys like a held breath. Sugar and vanilla made fortunes here, and fortunes were built on backs that had no names in the ledgers, only prices. The Baroness inherited the estate 2 years prior, when her husband, the Baron Christophe de Belmont, died suddenly of what the physician called heart failure. She wore black for 6 months, received sympathies from the governor himself, and then did something unusual for a widow. She took control. No remarriage, no male trustee. She ran the plantation alongside her brother-in-law, Commandeur Etienne de Belmont, a man with a reputation for efficiency and a whip that sang in 3/4 time. Together, they made the estate more profitable than it had ever been under her husband's soft hand. The Baroness was praised in Port Louis drawing rooms as a patroness of science, a woman who proved that refinement and profit could grow side by side. Her garden was famous: orchids from Madagascar, frangipani from the Cape, a greenhouse full of specimens collected from passing ships, passion fruit, bird of paradise, and in one corner, a stand of laurier rose with white flowers that smelled like bitter almonds. Visitors remarked on the beauty. Nobody asked why a decorative plant needed its own locked enclosure. Pay close attention to what grows behind glass. The garden staff were kept separate from the main quarters. 7 workers, hand-picked, the Baroness said, for their skill and discretion. She called them her gardeners, though their labor fed the cash crops as much as it tended her ornamental beds. They lived in a stone cottage near the perfumery shed, close enough to be summoned, far enough to be forgotten. Isaure was the eldest, 29, born in Madagascar, taken at 12 when the slavers came through her village. She remembered her mother's hands in the soil, teaching her which roots healed and which ones stopped breath. That knowledge traveled with her across the water, and it kept her alive. The Baroness valued her for the vanilla. Isaure had a touch for the curing process, the slow fermentation that turned green pods black and filled the air with sweetness. She worked in the perfumery shed, distilling extracts, labeling bottles, keeping the reserves organized in rows. The Baroness trusted her skill. She did not trust her mind. That was the mistake. Fabien was the second eldest, 31, strong enough to move the heavy planters the Baroness used to redesign her garden each season. He had a brother once, Mathieu. 6 months ago, Mathieu collapsed in the cane fields under the overseer's watch. Heat, they said. Exhaustion. The overseer said he'd been lazy. Fabien said nothing, because speaking meant the whip, and the whip meant you didn't plant memorials or remember names. But Fabien remembered. Celeste was 15, quick-fingered, sharp-eyed, the one the Baroness used to arrange flowers for her salon tables. She moved through the house like a ghost, listening. Armand was old, 60 or more, an herbalist who once served the previous Baron and knew the estate's history better than its owners did. Zélia arranged the Baroness's personal bouquets and slept in the main house 3 nights a week. Toussaint kept the orchard. Madeleine tended the greenhouse, her hands scarred from thorns and steam. They were not blood, but they were family. In a place where family was sold at auction, that made them dangerous. The trouble started 10 days before the vanilla feast. Commandeur Etienne arrived at dawn with an announcement that sent the house into barely concealed panic. The governor would attend this year. Not just the governor, a delegation from the Compagnie des Indes, the trading company that controlled half the island's exports. The feast was an annual tradition, a display of Réunion's agricultural wealth. But this year it carried weight. Contracts would be signed. Reputations would be made or buried. The Baroness stood in her morning room, still in her dressing gown, and issued orders like cannon fire. The pavilion would be cleaned, the silver polished, the menu curated to perfection, and the dessert, her crème brûlée, made with the estate's own vanilla, would be the crown of the evening. She summoned Isor that afternoon. The perfumery shed sat behind the greenhouse, a low stone building that smelled of sugar and fermentation and something faintly bitter underneath. Rows of bottles lined the shelves, each labeled in Isor's small, precise hand. The Baroness swept in without knocking, as she always did, her silk skirts brushing the dirt floor. "The reserve extract," she said. "The 1822 batch. I'll need it for the brûlée." Isor kept her eyes down. "Yes, madam." "This must be perfect, Isor. The governor has a refined palate. If the vanilla is weak, if the texture is off, if there is even a hint of bitterness." She did not finish the threat. She never had to. "I understand, madam." The Baroness ran one gloved finger along the shelf, inspecting for dust that wasn't there. Her gaze lingered on the locked cabinet in the corner, the one where she kept her private stores, her experimental distillations, the things she did not trust, even to Isor. "You've kept everything in order?" "Yes, madame." "Good." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Isor, I know you're close to the others. If I hear any whispers, any disruptions before the feast, I'll hold you responsible. Do you understand?" "Yes, madam." The Baroness left. Isor stood very still, her hands clenched in her apron, and counted to 50 before she allowed herself to breathe. The problem was not the vanilla. The problem came 3 nights later, when the overseer caught Fabien in the garden after curfew. He was digging near the rose beds, his hands in the soil, a small wooden cross laid out on the ground beside him. Mathieu's name was carved into it, crude but clear. A memorial, a grave marker for a brother who had no grave. The overseer dragged him to the main house by his collar. The Baroness received them in her study, the commandeur standing behind her chair like a second shadow. Fabien was forced to his knees. The cross was placed on her desk. She stared at it for a long time. "Witchcraft," the overseer said. "Poisoning the soil, madame. I've seen it before. They bury tokens, cast curses. Enough." The Baroness's voice was soft, but it stopped him mid-breath. She picked up the cross, turned it over in her hands. "Who was Mathieu?" Fabien said nothing. "Answer her," the commandeur said. Still nothing. The Baroness set the cross down gently, almost tenderly. "I do not tolerate disruption in my garden. You've worked here long enough to know that." She glanced at the commandeur. "After the feast, sell him. To the labor camp in Mauritius. I'll not have him spreading unrest before the governor arrives." Fabien's face went still. Isor, standing in the doorway where she'd been summoned to witness the sentencing, felt the floor tilt beneath her. The Baroness looked at her. "You'll prepare the brûlée as instructed, and you'll tell the others that obedience is rewarded. Disobedience is removed." "Yes, madame." That night, Isor did not sleep. She sat in the cottage with the others, Fabien's wrists still raw from the overseer's grip, and felt the edges of the world narrow to a single question. How do you stop a woman who holds your life in one hand and a bill of sale in the other? Celeste was crying quietly in the corner. Armand sat by the fire, his face unreadable. Zélia paced. Toussaint stared at his hands. Fabien spoke first. "Don't. Whatever you're thinking, Isor, don't." She looked at him. "They'll work you to death in Mauritius. And if you act, they'll kill you here. Maybe." She stood, walked to the window, stared out at the dark garden. "Or maybe there's a third option." Madeleine's voice, small and tired. "There's never a third option." Isor turned back to them. "The Baroness wants perfection for her feast. She wants her vanilla brûlée to impress the governor, to prove her refinement, her control." She paused. "What if the thing she controls is the thing that buries her?" Armand looked up sharply. Isor met his eyes. "Some bottles are marked, some are not, and some should never have been stored beside each other." Celeste understood first. Her hand went to her mouth. "The bottle," she whispered. "The one in the back." Isor nodded slowly. "The one that sat too close to the Laurier rose cuttings. The one that absorbed what it shouldn't have." Zélia stepped forward, her voice tight. "You're talking about killing her." "I'm talking about serving her exactly what she ordered," Isor said. "Her own vanilla, from her own garden, prepared by her own distiller." Toussaint looked at Fabien, still slumped against the wall. "And if they find out?" "They won't." Armand's voice carried a strange certainty. "Because the Baroness herself will provide the explanation. She's been acting like a woman with secrets to bury. When she dies at her own table, they'll look in her chambers. And when they do..." He glanced at Isor. "What will they find?" "Her perfume cabinet," Isor said quietly. "The one she never lets anyone touch. The one with the false bottom." The shed went silent, except for the rain beginning to tap against the roof. "How do you know about that?" Zélia asked. "Because I watched her lock something inside it 2 years ago, the week after the Baron died. And I've watched her check it every month since, like a woman making sure a grave hasn't opened." Fabien stirred, his voice raw. "Don't do this for me." Isor crouched beside him. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because she's already decided which of us lives and which of us disappears, and I'm tired of waiting for her to choose." She looked around at the others. "We're already guilty. Guilty of being here. Guilty of breathing her air. If we do nothing, Fabien's gone in 10 days. The rest of us just wait our turn. Madeleine's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. What do you need from us? The day of the feast, Isor said. The Baroness will want everything perfect. She'll inspect the kitchen, the pavilion, the garden. I need you scattered. Toussaint in the orchard, trimming branches where the guests will walk. Zélia arranging flowers in the great hall. Celeste and Madeleine in the greenhouse, reporting phantom aphids on the jasmine so the Baroness goes to check. Armand in the quarters, visible and accounted for. When they ask later where everyone was, we all have witnesses. And you? Armand asked. I'll be in the kitchen, Isor said, where I always am, doing exactly what the Baroness told me to do. Zélia's voice dropped. If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong, Isor said, because the Baroness believes we're too frightened to think, too ignorant to act. She sees 7 gardeners. She doesn't see 7 people who've watched her every move for years. The problem is, the Baroness wasn't just paranoid. She was meticulous. 3 days before the feast, she appeared in the perfumery shed unannounced, the overseer trailing behind her. Isor barely had time to step away from the workbench. Show me the reserves, the Baroness said. Isor's heart kicked once, hard, but her hands stayed steady. She led the Baroness to the shelf where the marked bottles stood in neat rows. The unmarked one sat in the back, precisely where it had been for months, gathering dust and appearing forgotten. The Baroness inspected each label, lifted several bottles to the light, checking clarity and color. She nodded at one. This vintage. Use this for the brûlée. Isor took the bottle the Baroness indicated, pure, clean, exactly what it claimed to be, and set it on the workbench. Yes, madame. The Baroness's gaze drifted past her, scanning the shed. For a moment her eyes caught on the back shelf. Isor's pulse roared in her ears, but the Baroness only frowned at a water stain on the ceiling and turned away. The governor's physician will attend the feast, she said as she left. He has a sensitive palate. Do not embarrass me. When the door closed, Isor exhaled slowly. The overseer lingered a moment, watching her with a flat suspicion he aimed at everything. Then he too was gone. That night, Isor told the others, "She picked a bottle. I have to switch it without her seeing." "When?" Toussaint asked. "The morning of the feast. She'll be occupied with the pavilion setup. That's the only window." Armand shook his head. "One mistake, Isor." "I know." But the morning of the feast, the Baroness didn't go to the pavilion. She went to the greenhouse. Madeleine's panicked whisper reached Isor through the kitchen window. "She's asking about the aphids. She wants to see them." Isor's mind raced. The dessert was already half prepared. The clean bottle sat on the kitchen counter. The contaminated one was still in the shed, and the Baroness was moving in the wrong direction. She made a decision. She told the head cook she'd forgotten a spice in the perfumery, left the kitchen, and walked across the yard with steady, unremarkable steps. Inside the shed, she grabbed the unmarked bottle, slipped it into her apron, and walked back. Halfway across the yard, the overseer rounded the corner. He stopped. She stopped. "What's that?" he said, nodding at the bulge in her apron. "Vanilla," Isor said. The Baroness wanted the reserves checked one more time. He stepped closer. "Show me." Isor pulled the bottle halfway out. The glass was old, the liquid inside amber and viscous, identical to a dozen others in the shed. The overseer squinted at it. "That's not the one she picked." Isor's voice didn't waver. "Madame changed her mind this morning. She said the first one wasn't aged enough." It was a gamble. The Baroness changed her mind constantly, and the overseer knew it. He studied her face for a long, brutal moment. Then he grunted, "Get back to work." Isor walked into the kitchen, set the contaminated bottle beside the clean one, and began to measure. Her hands didn't shake. They couldn't. What the Baroness didn't know was that Isor had spent 2 years memorizing the rhythm of that house. When the overseer made his rounds, when the Baroness inspected the roses, when the commandeur took his cigars on the veranda. She'd learned that power isn't just what you control, it's what you see. And the Baroness had stopped seeing her gardeners as people who could see back. By midday, the pavilion glowed with lanterns and linen. The governor's carriage arrived, followed by a line of officials and their wives, all perfumed and eager for scandal to dissect later over port. The Baroness stood at the center of it all, radiant in silk, her smile sharp as pruning shears. In the kitchen, Isor folded the contaminated extract into cream and eggs, caramelized sugar over low flame, and portioned the brulee into delicate ramekins. The head cook praised the gloss. The commandeur inspected the trays and nodded approval. No one asked which bottle she'd used. At dusk, Isor carried the desserts to the pavilion on a silver tray, her face blank, her bouffard even. She placed one before the governor, one before the commandeur, one before each guest. She saved the Baroness for last. The Baroness looked up as Isor set the ramekin down. For just a moment, their eyes met. "Beautiful work," the Baroness said. "Thank you, madame," Isor replied. Then she stepped back into the shadows where the other servants waited, and she watched. The Baroness lifted her spoon. She broke through the caramelized crust with a soft crack. She brought the first bite to her lips, and Isor, for the first time in years, allowed herself to breathe. The sweetness spread across her tongue. The Baroness closed her eyes, savoring it. Around the table, the governor and his delegation murmured approval. Crystal clinked against porcelain. Lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting soft light across the garden pavilion. Isor stood at the edge of the terrace, hands folded, invisible. Beside her, Zalia arranged fresh jasmine in a silver bowl. Neither woman spoke. Neither woman looked at the Baroness, but they were both watching. "Exquisite," the governor said, lifting his own spoon. "Madame de Belmont, your estate continues to astound." The Baroness smiled. She took another bite, then another. Across the pavilion, near the oleander hedge, Fabien leaned against a stone column. His back was bandaged beneath his shirt. The whipping 2 days prior had left him barely able to stand. But the commandeur had insisted he serve as footman tonight, a display of discipline for the governor's benefit. Fabien's eyes found Isor's. She gave the smallest nod. He understood. It was done. The Baroness reached for her wine glass. Her hand trembled, just slightly. She frowned, set the glass down, and pressed her fingers to her temple. "Madame?" the commandeur asked from across the table. "A headache," she murmured. "The heat." She took another sip of wine. Then her face changed. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow unraveling. Her breath shortened. Her pupils dilated. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, and tried to stand. "Héloïse." The commandeur rose, alarmed. The Baroness opened her mouth to speak. No words came, only a choked gasp. Her legs buckled. She collapsed forward, her face striking the table, scattering plates and candles. The pavilion erupted. The governor shouted for a physician. Servants rushed forward. The commandeur caught the Baroness as she slid from her chair, her body convulsing, foam flecking her lips. "Get the doctor!" the commandeur roared. "Now!" Isor did not move. She stood at the edge of the terrace, hands still folded, and watched the woman who had held her life in a fist for 7 years die in front of the island's most powerful men. Zelia's breath hitched beside her. Isor touched her wrist once, gently. A reminder. Stay calm. Say nothing. The physician arrived within minutes. He knelt beside the Baroness, checked her pulse, pried open her eyelids. The convulsions had stopped. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. "Poison," the physician said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. The governor's face darkened. "Impossible. We all ate from the same kitchen." "Not poison in the meal," the physician clarified, still examining her. "Poison in her system. Oleander, perhaps, or something similar." He looked up at the commandeur. "Has Madame been experimenting with botanicals again?" The commandeur's expression twisted. "She keeps a perfumery shed. Oils, extracts, for her garden work." "Show me." The commandeur hesitated. Then he gestured to 2 soldiers. "Search the house. Bring everything from her perfume cabinet." Isor's pulse quickened. She kept her face blank. The Baroness's breathing stopped. The physician checked again, then sat back on his heels. "She's gone." The governor stood abruptly. "I want answers. No one leaves this estate until we know what happened." For 3 days they were questioned. One by one, the gardeners were brought into the commandeur's study and interrogated. "What did you see? What did you serve? Who had access to the kitchen?" Isor answered every question with calm precision. She had prepared the dessert using the vanilla extract the Baroness herself had selected. She had followed Madame's instructions exactly. She had served the dish as ordered. "And the bottle?" the investigator pressed. "Where is it now?" "In the perfumery shed, monsieur, on the 3rd shelf, where it has always been kept." They retrieved it. They tested it. They found traces of laurier rose mixed with the vanilla. "Contamination," the investigator concluded. "Careless storage." But that was not all they found. On the 2nd day, the governor's physician opened the lacquered perfume cabinet in the Baroness's chambers. He discovered the false bottom. Inside, a small leather journal, written in the Baroness's own hand. The entries were dated 2 years prior. Detailed notes on the preparation of oleander extract, observations on dosage, symptoms, and timing. And, at the end, a single line. "It is done. He will never free them. The estate is mine." The physician brought the journal to the governor. The room fell silent as he read. When he finished, the governor closed the journal with a sharp snap. His face was stone. "The Belmont name is finished." The commandeur tried to speak. The governor raised a hand. "You will be held in Port Louis, pending further investigation. The estate is seized by the crown. All contracts of servitude are void." Celeste, standing in the corner of the kitchen where the announcement was read, started to cry. Armand gripped her shoulder. Toussaint stared at the floor, unable to process the words. Isor stood beside Fabien. His hand found hers in the shadows. She squeezed once. They were free. The estate was abandoned within 6 months. The governor's men stripped it of valuables and left the rest to rot. The garden overgrew. Vanilla vines tangled with jasmine and laurier rose climbing over trellises and pavilion columns, reclaiming the land. Isor and Fabien left Réunion on a merchant ship bound for Madagascar. Celeste and Toussaint went with them. Zélia stayed on the island and trained as a midwife in Saint-Denis. Armand and Madeleine settled in the highlands, where the air was cool, and no one asked about scars. They were free